Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Patch 3.20 is actually closer than a lot of us have realised. It's only about 10 days until League start. And we've had somewhat of an unusual spoiler season where GGG have been delivering all of the balance manifestos first, but none of the little teasers that have been customary in the past. So what they're doing now is they are going back to daily teasers for the rest of the time until the League starts, or at least it looks like they'll be daily. And in addition to that, of course, we've got the big live stream announcement, which is less than 3 days away and is always a great time. I'll be restreaming that possibly on Twitch, possibly on YouTube. If there's going to be Twitch drops, it'll be over on Twitch. And if there's nothing of that sort, then it'll probably be on YouTube instead. Today, we got one new Keystone. This is replacing Doomsday on the passive tree, which is no longer going to function after all of the Curse Manifesto discussion that we had yesterday. So if you missed any of the discussion of the 4 balance manifestos, I will link all of them down in the description below. Hexmaster is a new keystone that is going to be of pretty limited use for most players. It causes your hexes duration to be infinite. Now, I like to think of this as being your hexes base duration is increased to 1 week. They still end if your character dies, they still end if you portal out of the map, but otherwise they're just not going to end. However, the drawback is pretty considerable. Not only do you have the opportunity cost of taking Hexmaster and needing to be in the right area of the tree, but you also have 20% less effect of your curses. When would you use this? Broadly speaking, I think the answer is you would not use this on most characters. You do not want to use this on characters where your curses have their full duration under normal gameplay. But if you're playing the sort of build like Stormcall that actually wants to decrease duration on all of your skills, you might find that all of those things that are reducing the duration of your Stormcall are also decreasing the duration of your hexes to the point that they're no longer useful. In that situation, Hexmaster has its uses. Stormcall is not a popular skill at the moment in 3.19, and I don't see any reason to assume that it will be in 3.20. But if you are a Stormcall enjoyer, then this is something that's there for you. Otherwise, I would say forget it. In most situations, it'll be better to manually recast your hexes every now and again. I do think it's important to point out in editing that I don't assume that most players will flawlessly reapply their hexes exactly as the old one expired. I know that that's something that I'm not capable of doing, and I think there's probably only a few dozen people with the level of mechanical skill necessary to flawlessly reapply their hexes every time they expire. However, even assuming that we make little human mistakes and that sometimes we end up with a hex falling off for a little while, sometimes we reapply it even a full second or two too early, even allowing for those little mistakes, Hexmaster is not going to be worth it for most builds. But, of course, the exception still stands. If you are reducing the duration of all of your skills so that you can empower Lightning Warp or so that you can empower Stormcall or something like that, then Hexmaster is something to seriously consider. The second thing that came out today was the Curses FAQ. So with the big overhaul that was announced yesterday and all of the discussion that we had on that with the Curses Manifesto, GGG had a number of questions they wanted to answer that came out of that. So these are a lot of follow-ups. The first one is, are you changing Bane? And yes, Bane will also have a curse penalty, similar to Hex Touch support and Blasphemy support. We don't have exact numbers on that, and it'll be important to see what those numbers actually are. Will you make Vixen's Entrapment work with Bane? Unfortunately, the answer here is no. Vixen's Entrapment is a unique set of gloves that used to work very well with Bane. Then there were some changes that were made when they first introduced the concept of hexes that broke that interaction. And it's caused Vixen's Entrapment to go from fantastic in conjunction with Bane to worthless in conjunction with Bane and not very good in conjunction with anything else either. Unfortunately, that is not changing. Will Delve keep its depth scaling curse effect reduction? Yes. Will a less curse effect on players modifier be removed from temporal chains? No, it will not. There's really 3 reasons for this. The first and least important is PvP balance. The second, and probably the most important, is for when temporal chains is cast upon players by either a map mod or by a monster. And then the third reason for this is when players inflict temporal chains on themselves in a self-curse setup. In all of these cases, the temporal chains will be a reduced effect. For most players, this is a net positive, but if you were playing self-curse temporal chains, then this is going to be worse than if GGG had given the opposite answer here. But I do think for most players, this is the answer you want to hear. Can you change Hex Blast so that the hex it removes isn't random? Yes, instead of removing a random hex, as was announced yesterday, Hexblast will remove the hex that has the lowest remaining duration, i.e. whichever one would naturally expire first. I don't actually know how that's going to interact with Hexmaster. Maybe they just decide that infinite duration is actually just a very large number, and then in that case it may be the oldest hex that gets removed. They'll figure something out there. Do these changes now encourage weapon swapping builds? So this is something I wasn't sure about. There's a lot of discussion going around that it might be optimal to offhand a Cane of Kulamak, and this Cane of Kulamak would have Bane linked to 5 different curse gems, and then when you started an encounter against a tougher monster, you would weapon swap, you would then cast this Bane, and this Bane would have all of its stats amped up by the Cane of Kulamak and would apply 5 different curses. We'll get to how you'd get your curse limit at 5 in a sec. And then once you've done that, you would then weapon swap back to your real weapon, and then you would start using whatever your main skill is. That is not going to work because your curses will be removed if you lose the skill that applied the curse. So if you want to benefit from Cane of Kulamak enhanced Bane and curses, you need to keep that Cane of Kulamak in your hands to do that. Additionally, your curses will be removed if you die or leave the area. Can you give us more of an idea as to how vulnerability has changed? It no longer has the stats, ailments inflicted on cursed enemies deal damage 20% faster, because this stat didn't work. And that's something that surprised a lot of people. We've also buffed its chance to bleed, and it still has its physical damage stat. How will these changes affect Doedre's skin, the unique? That is unchanged. Does the change item mods that inflict a specific hex no longer do so with increased effect apply to corrupted glove modifiers? The question here is asking if you have a set of gloves that has the implicit mod curse enemies with vulnerability on hit with 44% increased effect, what will this become in 3.20? It'll instead just be curse enemies with vulnerability on hit. There will no longer be 44% increased effect on that curse. Will hexes from an item with a curse on hit modifier be affected by the new hex-related cluster jewel notables? Yes, unless particular notables specify otherwise. You didn't mention curse on hit rings, corrupt implicits, or cast when damage taken linked with curses. Have any of the following things been changed? Curse on hit rings and corrupt implicits no longer come with increased effects. Cast when damage taken hasn't been changed. Does the removal of boss penalties benefit mark skills? No, it does not. And how common is the Anathema ring? Now, when we were talking about making your curse limit, scaling it up to the moon before talking about Cane of Kulamak, Anathema is a unique ring that was announced yesterday. It's kind of ridiculous, and it has your curse limit is equal to your maximum power charges. The question here is, how common is the Anathema ring? I am speculating it is going to be tier 1 rarity. So tier 1 is the same as Doriani's Prototype, it's the same as Ralakesh's Impatience in 3.19, it is the same as Arakali's Fang, it's about 4 times as rare as Chevron's Wrappings, and it's quite a lot more common than Headhunter or Mageblood, but it is still very, very rare. And that's based on GGG's recent practice, where items that are powerful on an extraordinarily wide range of builds tend to be tier 0 uniques like Headhunter or Mageblood, or items that are much more niche but still extraordinarily powerful, like Ralakesh's Impatience, like Diala's Malefaction, like the Covenant, or like Thunderfist. These tend to be tier 1 rarity. These are still very, very rare. You shouldn't count on ever seeing them in solo self-found, and if you're playing in Trade League, you should expect that getting your hands on Anathema will take dedication. That said, GGG's answer is just simply a smiley face. They're not letting the cat out of the bag here, so this could be something that comes as a boss drop, it could be something that is very, very rare, or they could have decided to really throw a cat in amongst the pigeons and make it much more common than anyone expects. They have done that in the past with some very powerful unique items, such as the 3.19 era gloves that cause you to regenerate rage. Anyways, that's all we've got for today. May your Varlorbs have interesting results, and I will see you tomorrow with more news. I don't know how much news there'll be tomorrow, but that's going to be the fun of finding out.